Hello everyone, this is Grete, the artist behind Moonlore, and today I'm going to explain how I approach coloring. I must admit my coloring process varies from style to style. How I digitally paint and how I color in my sketches varies vastly from how I illustrate, which is what I'm going to be focusing on in this video. This is also the usual coloring process for my comics. Usually I have my line art done. I typically use Clip Studio Paint to get the line art done, but a few images have the line art done in Psy if I want a particularly cute or soft look. Most of my line art is saved as a transparent PNG, but in the case that you do not have transparency, most art programs have an option that turns the white areas of an image transparent and the black lines stay. This is called Luminance to Transparency in Psy, found under the Layer tab. And in Clip Studio Paint, this is called Convert Brightness to Opacity and can be found in the Edit tab. I don't know what these options are for other programs since I don't use those, but they should have the same-ish wording. My technique can mostly be used in any art program, but I color in Psy mostly because the selection tool automatically creates a mask in a blue tone and you can see what you've selected. It also has, in my opinion, much nicer brushes for blending. I've tried to fiddle with the brushes in Clip to work the same way, but they don't work as I want them to. So now that I have that out of the way, I can actually get to the coloring explanation. I begin with flatting everything. Flatting, or flat coloring, is the process of laying down the local color of each section of the image. Each color also goes onto its own layer to avoid color mixing. I usually make sure everything is flatted properly. This way, if I start shading, I can make sure that each part of the image is already the right color and I don't have to go back and fix the colors in certain sections. Sometimes you think you've gotten all the parts in the color you want, but inevitably in a more complex piece, you'll miss a part or color it in the wrong color, so it's important that each color is allocated to its proper place. The flat color depends on what you're working on. This piece is a commission I did for a client of their Celestial Warlock Tiefling, and I had a variety of different references to work from. Most of the colors are either color picked or eyeballed. This piece is more of a portrait, so I don't actually have to mess with the local colors of the character. In comics, if there's a specific light, say nighttime, the local colors of a character are very different, and instead of the, for example, typical pale skin color, a character might instead be a gray color. But this is a topic for another video since comic color stories are a really specific topic I want to tackle in the future. Moving on to shading. Most of the time, I try to shade with a color that is slightly different to the original color. So if you have someone with blonde hair, which is yellow, I would then move the color slider a bit more towards the red to pick a more orangey color to shade with. It helps the color stand out. Shading with black is not something I do. It can end up killing the color and making the image look really bland. In this particular case, I've opted to try and shade with more blue and purple undertones since the character is moon themed. On the hair, you can see the most variety of tones. The hair itself is supposed to be a silvery color, but I've shaded with various tones of blue and purple to give it a bit of an iridescent effect, and highlighted with warmer tones to offset the cold colors and to give the sense that her hair isn't a desaturated purple, but a silver. Admittedly, it takes a long time to learn color theory for shading. I myself have a very difficult time with things like ambient occlusion, which is the shading in the areas that are incredibly dark on a character where no light hits, and subsurface scattering, where the light goes through more translucent objects and can most often be found on skin. Another thing to consider when shading is the texture of the object you're shading. Skin, metal, silk, hair, and horns all have vastly different textures, and as such, I approach shading them differently. Skin is not that reflective at all. There's a bit of light that will reflect, but most of the time the light that hits the skin is very diffused. Hair and metal, on the other hand, are very reflective materials, and I approach them both very similarly. I lay down the local color, add a shadow color that fits with the material, then ambient shading, before adding ambient light and shine. Making hair and metal shiny is very important to me. The best way to figure out how to shade different materials is to look at them. Look at how hair reflects light. Look at some spoons. Do some studies of your houseplant on a sunny day. It takes a long time to learn how to properly give the impression of texture on something, and the best way to do that is through practice, honestly. There's also the concept of hard versus soft shadows and light sources. A light source dictates where the highlights and the shadows fall on your image. Usually, this also dictates the color of the shadow you get. A warmer toned light source creates a cold shadow, and a cooler toned light source tends to create a warmer shadow. But in some very strong blue lights, an image ends up simply looking monochromatic, so do make sure you experiment with that as well. Next up is the difference between hard and soft shadows. Shadows depend on the intensity of light hitting an object and the shapes of said object. In most cases, when I shade arms or larger areas with softer curves, I go for soft shadows, and this denotes a gradual change in the shape. Hard shadows, for example the shading that the warlock's skirt casts over her thighs, happens when a light source hits an object and the light is immediately blocked, instead of changing gradually. Having a variety of shadows in the image helps give a sense of different objects interacting with each other, and makes the image more interesting. It also helps to have multiple light sources in your image to make it seem like the character is actually in a space that's dynamic. I'm going to finish with explaining how I personally add shine. I'm a big fan of weird glowing effects, and most of the time they're not even based on reality, but I enjoy drawing them anyway, especially when they're blues or purples. I often have the immediate source of the light airbrushed with a light color on a layer mode that makes the light ridiculously shiny. In this case, it's the luminosity layer on Psy, but can also be the add glow mode on Clip Studio. You may need to experiment with what you have available in your program. I then add sharp highlights to areas where the light hits to add rim lights. And again, this depends on where the light source is, how strong it is, and various other factors, and you really need to experiment with these and see what looks good with what you draw. The last piece of advice I can give is to keep shadows and highlight colors the same. If you shade in purples and blues on one part of the image, shade with those tones throughout, or use a multiply layer with the same color throughout. It helps marry all of the colors together and to make the piece look more well put together. Same with highlights. If you're using an orange screen layer mode, use that throughout. On characters with many colors, it helps to have the same shadows and highlights to make them fit into a scene or illustration. Thank you all for watching this video and listening to me give my best attempt at explaining how I color. Give the video a thumbs up if you found it useful, and please subscribe to my channel for more of these videos whenever they may show up. I'm gonna give an extra shout out to my patrons who've been supporting me throughout the last few months. If you'd like to join my Patreon and support me, you'll be able to find a link in the video description below. This has been Moonlore, and I'll be seeing you all next time.